You're welcome to the Bereans TV YouTube channel. Today we will be looking at another topic, though this topic may come in two series, in two parts, and it is titled Nothing Like Altar Under the New Testament. You see, why I chose this topic is because of what I have seen over the years in the faith, the rate at which we proclaim altar, and we have overrated altar. I mean, altar call, altar this, altar that. Come to the altar. There is a covenant with this altar. My altar is calling you. This altar of a thing has become something in Christendom, especially among the Pentecostals, so to say. And I think it's high time we addressed this issue, so that whosoever wants to hear will definitely hear and understand. You see, one major enemy, should I use the word enemy? One major enemy of the New Testament practice is the Old Testament syndrome, Old Testament issue. Of course, we have the flesh. That is the biggest problem to Christianity. Biggest problem either in individual life or in the church life, or the flesh is the big problem or the biggest problem. Of course, the devil comes second after the flesh, because if we don't allow the flesh, there is no way. The devil walks through the flesh, walks through our Adamic nature, because of course he's the originator, he's the one who gave us that nature. And so he walks through that nature. But if we are able to conquer the flesh, everything is done. And then the other challenge we have is the Old Testament syndrome. In fact, the apostles, they got stuck with the Old Testament syndrome. You remember in Acts of the Apostles how they battled circumcision, this and that. The first council that they had to resolve some doctrinal issues in Acts of the Apostles was about circumcision, that they want the Gentile believers to also circumcise themselves and things like that. So Old Testament has been a big problem, a big rival to the New Testament practice. And one of the Old Testament practice that has refused to leave the New Testament practice alone is the practice of altar. Altar this, altar that. And whenever you see, there is no any denominational building that they call church that you enter, you always see a demarcated place raised above the other level, the other congregational floor, and then they call it altar, like in the Old Testament. And that is where the problem is. And so, don't be surprised when I say there is nothing like altar under the New Testament. But we have to trace it a little, so that in this part one, we trace it a little, and then in this part one, then we look at why we don't need altar again under the New Testament. And then in part two, we'll continue with why we don't need altar in the New Testament. Yes, the word altar was first mentioned in Genesis chapter 8, verse 20. And it says, Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Do you hear that? Offering of burnt offering on the altar. So that means even when the altar was first mentioned, the purpose it served was that they kill animal and burn it on the altar to sacrifice unto God. Where did Noah get this idea? Probably it was a common practice, maybe, I don't know, but I think history has mentioned something like that. Even the idol worshipper, as far back as that time, it was a common practice. But how did they get it? Some scholars, Bible scholars, have traced it down to Adam. At least Adam sacrificed, because we wouldn't know where, of course, where else would Cain and Abel learn that they need to sacrifice unto God? So definitely, probably they would have learned it from their father. But we saw that Cain and Abel sacrificed to God. And even if the Bible does not call where they place the sacrifice altar, from where we read now in with Noah, then we definitely see that we could also call that of Cain and Abel altar, where they also burnt their own sacrifice unto God. But Cain and his sacrifice were not accepted unto God. It was Abel that was accepted. And when we move forward from Noah, then we move down again, we come to Abraham. Abraham in Genesis chapter 12 verse 7, he also built altar unto God. Isaac, followed by Isaac, Genesis chapter 26 verse 24 to 25, he also built altar. And then we come to Jacob. Jacob in Genesis chapter 35 verse 3, he built altar. Then we come to David. David in 1 Chronicles chapter 21 26, he built altar. Then we come to Judges, Gideon built altars. All this, they built altars, they burnt things, sacrifices on the altar as a form of worship unto God. And then we come to under the law. Of course, Judges had passed the law. Then we come under the law. God specifically commanded that they should build altar. But God said they must not use, it must be altar of the earth. That is, they should use only sand. They must not use stone. They must not use anything. They must not cut anything to build the altar. Let's read in Exodus 20, verse 24 to 26. God commanded Moses, "An altar of earth you shall make for me, and you shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I record my name, I will come to you, and I will bless you. And if you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stone." That is, if it's going to be stone. Sorry, I said the other time that it must not be stone. Yes, God said if it's going to be stone, that they must not cut it. It must not be a stone that is hewn. God says it must not be hewn stone. For if you use your tools on it, you have profaned it. That is, you have defied it. Nor shall you go up by steps. So there must not be any step, no stairs to the altar. It must be something you can just lift your feet, lift your leg once and climb. Not something you'll be going on stairs before you climb it. No. Nor shall you go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness may not be exposed. That is, it must not be something high, so much that when the priest is on it, people can see his underwear. No, God said no, He does not want that. And so it's clear that the altar, the purpose the altar serves is only for sacrifice. Nothing. There is nothing the altar serves than for sacrifice. Sacrifice of a dove, of a lamb, of goat, of this, burnt offering, and all kinds of offering, peace offering. They will bring grains of things. They bring it, they burn them on the altar, bring blood of animal for sacrifice. Of course, any sacrifice, any animal that is killed for sin offering, the blood will be brought on the altar to be burnt there, and the animal itself will be taken outside the camp to be burnt, because it's a sin offering. It will not be taken into the camp. And this is what continues until the main person that all these sacrifices are pointing to. Don't forget, the Old Testament is a shadow of the New Testament. It's about Jesus and the church. Many Christians don't know that. We've been stuck with the Old Testament. Hardly will you go to the midst of any group of Christians that you will not see traces of Old Testament practice. Of course, all the denominations, with no exceptions, you always see it there. If you don't see the hierarchical priesthood order of the Old Testament, you will see the altar, the choir, the this, the that. If you don't see that, you see it in monetary form, the tithe, the first fruit offering, the this, the that, everything. All these are under the Old Testament. And God has left the Old Testament for crying out loud. God is done away with that. There has been a transition. We are now under the New Testament. And the transition came, and Jesus came. And Jesus is the peak of all sacrifices. Jesus is the peak of anything called altar. The cross is a form of altar for Christ. And Christ was placed on the cross, which is a form of altar. And Christ was sacrificed, the only acceptable sacrifice unto the Father, unto God. All the other sacrifices were a shadow. They were types of Christ. And Christ is the real deal. And Christ has come now, and Christ died on the cross. That means his blood was shed on the altar. And then he was acceptable. He was the only acceptable sacrifice. God accepted that. Of course, anybody who has made the physical sacrifice of animals, of grains, by faith of Christ, by faith in Christ that is coming. Of course, Christ accepted it as though it is done in Christ, keeping it for the time when Christ will come. And Christ has come now. And then when Christ came, he made himself the altar on the cross, and he sacrificed himself there, and he was accepted.